Greetings all, I'm Neil from MeddiQuest and welcome to a short video that's about the evolution of technical documentation for CE marking medical devices, really where we've come from and what's expected for 2021 under the new medical device regulation. So it all started off with the Medical Device Directive and the requirements for technical documentation, which sort of got the nickname technical file, and there was also something else mentioned, a design dossier. The idea was that all the technical documentation about a particular medical device could be combined into a technical file. And for a class 3, a high-risk product, that file would also include information on the design, and that would be known as the design dossier. Now, what was actually required in this technical documentation was laid down in Annex 7 of the Medical Device Directive. Unusual or unconventional in this technical documentation. It's really just a record of the description of the product so you can identify it, its use so you know how it's going to be used, everything about the product, which of course includes the packaging, the labeling, if it's sterilized, how it's sterilized, if it's not sterilized but needs to be sterilized, how it's going to be sterilized. So you're really putting in all the information, and then your use experience with it. Once you've established your testing, how it's been tested, once it's used in a hospital or clinical environment, how it's performed in that clinical environment, so that you've got a full documentation of exactly what it says. It's the technical documentation for the complete medical device. Remember that, the complete medical device. That includes all the labeling in all the different languages. Don't make the mistake of missing that out. Now, the important thing about this technical documentation, or really anything you write in business, is you've got to think about who you're writing it for. And you are very definitely not writing it for the notified body auditor, notified body technical reviewer. They are not the person that you're writing it for, because they're going to review it, you're going to change it to meet their comments, but they're not the end audience. The technical documentation comes into its own when something goes wrong with your product, and it becomes an investigation. So think of it like an Agatha Christie whodunit novel. You've got to take the investigator through that investigation process, lead them by the hand. So first you need to start off by explaining what your device is so that they can understand it, and then go through all the particular aspects of manufacture, how it was designed, what it's intended to do, what materials have been used, what subcontractors have been used, and go through the rigorous sort of investigative procedure that the competent authority assessor is going to have to do, to look through it and say, okay, I can see in this aspect you've done everything right. Therefore, I can now rule out that there's a problem in that aspect. What you're about is writing a whodunit where you get to the end and you say, well, you've ruled out all the probable causes, everything that was reasonably foreseeable. And that's important. If it ends up going to court, you need to show that you've done everything that was reasonably foreseeable. You're not omnipotent. You couldn't rule out everything. You don't have infinite foresight to know peculiar things that might happen in the field, but you've done everything that a reasonable person could be expected to do. And the technical file is ultimately your defence, firstly against the competent authority when something's gone wrong, and secondly your defence in court that you've done everything that is reasonably foreseeable. Always remember that. Always remember that you have to lead the reader by the hand. Make sure that you're giving them enough of a narrative, not just throwing documents and reports of them at them, but giving them enough of a narrative in between so that they become convinced that you have dealt with everything that was reasonably foreseeable in that particular instance. Now, this got extended in 2010. We had an amending directive 2007-47 EC, which came into effect in 2010, and it introduced certain other things that needed to be included in the technical documentation. They're shown in blue on this slide. And then we'd also by this time had from NBMed, which was the organisation, but effectively the trade union of notified bodies, the group of big notified bodies who got together and decided what the best way of presenting things were. We had a suggested technical file structure. Now remember, the most important thing with the technical file is to remember who you're writing it for. Someone investigating when something's gone wrong. So whatever structure may be suggested by your notified body, you've got to put the one together that suits your particular product, your particular way of doing things. It's no good having 5 short chapters and 1 enormous chapter in which everything's just thrown in. You need to get a reasonable balance. You need to break it up so that someone dipping in can go, we found a body, it was stabbed, therefore I need to look for how it might have got stabbed. I need to look for mechanical injuries. Very clearly, keep this in mind. This was a suggested structure for the technical file, but it's not mandated. You need to structure it to suit your products. In 13485 2016, the quality system was very deliberately extended a lot of regulatory items, and that included specific things that were required in what was called a medical device file. It's basically a technical file. It talks about the same sort of thing, the general description, the specifications of the product. It goes into more detail on things like procedures and work instructions that you might not have put in a technical file before, particularly for things like storage, handling, distribution. If you're using a subcontractor or contract organisation for doing this, you might well not have included their SOPs or even your management SOPs in there before. So again, it was an extension of what was required, but this 2016 revision of 13485 was designed to come into compliance with and to fit the medical device regulation. And so it comes as no surprise that follows on to fit well with the medical device regulation. Now, of course, it's going to be reviewed as part of your quality audit as well as part of your technical file, because it's now come very clearly into 13485, which means you have to show the quality systems auditor that it looks like it's right. So if you followed an unusual structure for your device, show a cross-reference to 13485, show a cross-reference to the Medical Device Regulation. Be prepared to prove to them that your technical file is right, but don't compromise on the fact the technical file isn't written for some box-ticking bureaucrat. It's written to help the investigator if something goes wrong and you've suddenly found yourself in the dock. Okay, so under the Medical Device Regulation, we now have what needs to go into a medical device spelt out directly in the regulation in Annex 2. So we've got the description, the specification, now includes UDI, because UDAMED, the database of all medical devices, is the big thing that comes in and is very much the main gain of the medical device regulation, if and when UDAMED ever gets finished. But that's another sad story of an EU infrastructure IT project that, oh dear, we really don't want to think about. So the description, the specification, enough that you can show clearly, enough that the investigator can decide, is it your product? Or if it's something that happened with somebody else's product, could it happen with your product? A lot of the point of the information here is to be able to rule your product out if it's not guilty. Make sure you don't skimp on this. You're very clear on who's not guilty. The information supplied, what you give with the product, your instructions for use, your labelling, your promotional materials, the claims you make about it, how it's designed and manufactured, and the general safety and performance requirements. Now these are the basics. They're the replacement for the essential requirements of the old directive. They're the safety and performance requirements that all medical devices, whatever their purpose, are expected to meet. And in addition to the harmonised standards, we have some new common standards that are likely to be more clinically focused and will be drafted for the European Commission, probably come out by the MDCG, the Medical Device Coordination Group, but as yet we don't have any of those. In fact, we don't even have any standards that are harmonised under the Medical Device Regulation, so we're having to use standards that were harmonised under the Medical Device Directive as they've been updated, and take the assumption that they are now the state of the art. This is a route beloved of notified bodies, just because the European regulators have failed to get their act together on doing their part of implementation and getting the standards available in time for manufacturers to use them. You might think you've left it till the last minute. Time and time again on the MDR, the Commission's pushed it well past the last limit and eaten up not just other people's time, but nearly all of other people's time. Now, what I just want to say in here is one of the big things that we're gaining on here is also we're following 14971 2019, which is the risk management standard updated. And one of the more pedantic changes is we now talk about a benefit risk assessment rather than a risk-benefit assessment. And I mention this because putting those words the wrong way round has been known to give people a major non-compliance with pedantic notified bodies, because they claim that if you put them the wrong way round, you're following the old standard. So now we're going to have to say benefit risk assessment, even if that isn't in our vocabulary as an organisation, if we've got one of these highly pedantic notified bodies who are more interested in process than the safety of the products. Okay, that's my little bit of a rant for today, so I've got that off my chest. Right, the other thing that's important is cross-referencing. So let's look at how we might run through this. We start off with the GSPRs, we then go into risk management. That gives us our design inputs, those go on to our design outputs, that gives us our specification, then we can verify that our product is meeting that specification and then transfer that into production. So what we've done is run through our whole process. Now we need to link those together. How do the GSPRs interface with the risks and the benefits that we've identified? Or the benefits and risks, of course, that we have identified. The design inputs, how do those meet with the design outputs? How do those meet the design verification? How do we show that it's been validated, that it's suitable for use? We also have to look at the other elements of the supply chain, what we're now going to call economic operators that we might employ. So it's storage, distribution, handling, people who supply raw materials, suppliers of components. All these people are part of the supply chain, and all these people have a role to play in our product and putting it on the market. When it's put on the market, we now monitor it. We monitor not just our product, but the market, so that we can show it's still state of the art. There aren't other better products out there. So benchmarking becomes an important part of surveillance as we watch how our products are used and any adverse reports that may need to get reported through our EU authorised rep if we are not inside the European Union. Also, that's now fed back on a regular basis into our post-market surveillance user reports and into our clinical evaluation report. That needs to be reviewed at the very senior level by our management, and it's the job of a new person under the MDR, the PRRC, the person with responsibility for regulatory compliance, to make sure that we're doing that and feeding it back to the GSPRs to start the process again for modifying the product. It's this feedback loop that's critical to show that you've used all the available information. You haven't just blindly gone on making the product you first designed, but that you've followed up. You've looked into the manufacture of that product, how it's been put on the market, how it's been used. You've understood all the things that might go wrong. So you've got all these little feedback loops in here that may come during your design process, your manufacturing process. You've understood what might happen, but you've also got this big loop round the outside to catch it if things start going wrong in practice. That cross-referencing is absolutely key to being able to tell your good story to the investigator, so that they can see whatever the area is, you've linked it all up, you've linked it together, you've fed back the information, kept your product current. So just to continue a little bit further with Annex 2, we've got product verification and validation, where they'll be looking at verification to show that it meets the specification, validation to show that it's fit for use, which may well involve some degree of biophysical modelling. It may involve clinical use, and that may link you into your clinical evaluation. Specifically, post-market surveillance is also now included, and the technical documentation from post-market surveillance is included in Annex 3. So remember to decide that this is part of your technical documentation for the device as well. So you've got incidents reports, corrections, records, analysis, trends. Maybe this is the benchmarking that you've been doing against competitive products. Maybe it's your market intelligence. Maybe it's your ongoing updated benefit risk assessment. As you discovered, perhaps those initial risks that you assessed at the design stage, or maybe you made them too high. Your product's actually better than you thought it was. And not only that, maybe the benefits are greater. Maybe it's finding greater user acceptance than you thought it was. These are all things that you need to report. These all come into your post-market surveillance. Also, convincing somebody who's looking at this that you've done the job with post-market surveillance. You've used all the communication channels you reasonably could. You've got procedures in place. You're showing traceability of the product, proving that it's all working out and that everything's working just the way. So I hope you can see how technical documentation for CE marking medical devices has gradually evolved over the last 25 years, from the early Medical Device Directive through various changes, through the implementation of a quality system standard, into the new regulation, and now it covers the complete life cycle of the product. And of course, it's still just as important as it ever was that you remember who is the end user of your technical documentation. It's not you. It's not your notified body. Of course you'll use it, you'll use bits of it along the way, but it has to tell the investigator, who knows precious little about you, your company, or your product, everything they need to know to assess whether your product is a suspect, a prime suspect, a guilty party, or, as we all hope, not guilty. This technical documentation is your file of evidence, but you have to lead the investigator through the file of evidence so that they become as convinced as you need to be that your product is in compliance, it is correct, and you've done everything that was reasonably foreseeable to make sure that you've minimized the risks, maximized the benefits, and have got the best possible benefit risk outcome for the device. Thank you very much. I've been Neil Armstrong for MeddiQuest. Look forward to seeing you in another one of our videos again real soon.